Thanks for checking out this Web Extra. My conversation with Scott County Attorney candidates Caleb Copley and Kelly Cunningham Hahn ran long. The issue we couldn't have time to bring you on For the Record, prosecuting gangs. There's a five-letter word that's a problem around here that police have some difficult time using, even some mayors, and that's the word gangs. How much of a problem is this from your experience as a prosecutor? How would you approach it to work with police and community agencies as a Scott County attorney?
All right.
Kelly Cunningham Hahn, you're first.
That's a problem that I'm dealing with there in Muscatine, and we're having a real issue with the Latin Kings. I had gone back home to Kansas in 2016 after the unexpected death of two of my family members, and so that was what prompted my departure from the Scott County Attorney's Office. But while I was home, I was asked to come back to the state of Iowa as the first assistant there in Muscatine. When I got there, it became very apparent that the Latin Kings are a real problem, and these individuals, they have no respect for the citizens in that community, and what we are seeing is that innocent citizens are going about their day and being attacked by these individuals for no reason. So in conjunction with the law enforcement officers that I'm working with, we've been very, very aggressive in the steps taken to bring those individuals to justice and actually bring them into the courtroom, try them, and give them appropriate jail sentences if it's an indictable misdemeanor, or sending them off to prison. By taking that tough approach, it has made a real difference. Now in Scott County, it was a real problem back in the 90s, and that was when the issue was becoming something that law enforcement and the criminal justice system was looking at. And we were able to get that issue shut down by the late 90s by virtue of our aggressive prosecution. And then we reached a point where nobody wanted to say that they were a part of a criminal street gang, but you know, as time passes, memories fade, and now we have the reemergence of these criminal street gangs. So that's something that there has to be a real focus on. But in focusing on those prosecutions, you have to have the expertise needed to know how to prosecute these individuals. There are certain types of crimes that require the introduction of expert testimony. Gang-related crimes, it definitely involves that. We have police officers who are specially trained to testify as criminal gang experts, and then you've got to know how to work with them and what evidence to produce so that you can get those convictions.
Approach to gangs.
Yeah.
Because people don't want to admit it, but they apparently are here in Scott County.
So I think the reason you're not hearing the word gangs anymore is because we're just not seeing the typical gang relationships that we used to see in the early 90s. They're not structured anymore. They're not structured the way that, for example, the Latin Kings were or other rival gangs. What we're seeing now, in the word that we're actually using among law enforcement, is groups. Because they're not...
Sounds like a euphemism.
Potentially, I guess, but the big strategy that we're working on in Scott County is what's called group violence intervention. Because what we're actually seeing is that compared to, say, the Latin Kings or, for example, the lowriders, those groups don't have the same structures, the same leadership hierarchy. They are individuals that are, quite frankly, oftentimes loosely affiliated together. One friend today might be a foe you shoot at tomorrow. And so one of the strategies that we're implementing here in Scott County that I've partnered with the city of Davenport on is group violence intervention. It's an evidence-based strategy that is actually meant to kind of target the groups that are committing the most direct violence in our community. But to simply say that gang violence was cleaned up in the mid-90s is just simply not true. I was a federal prosecutor for 2.5 years before coming back to the Scott County Attorney's Office, and at that time they were investigating a significant rise, or frankly, well, not reemergence, but a significant problem with the lowrider street gang. The lowrider street gang has been a problem, or was a problem, in the Quad Cities for a very long time, and it wasn't something that went away in the 90s and then just came back in the late 2010s. I helped prosecute that case, and what we're seeing though is the lowriders these days are the exception, not the norm. And so what we have to do is frankly reassess how we are defining group violence in the community, because gangs connotes a very specific form of an organization, and that's just not what we're seeing. And so we're seeing a lot more social media beefs, a lot more groups that are taking things to social media and dealing with issues that way. It's not what we saw in the 90s with gangs.
Things have evolved with the times.